So now, yes, on the note of artists working with lots of different organisms and microbes, including nanotech, Victoria Vesna is here from UCLA. And not only does Victoria have her own incredible practice of working with scientists and using nanotechnology and microbes, engaging the public in incredible ways all around the world. But she also started the Art Science Center at UCLA, which is over 10 years old now. And I was just seeing that you have alumni from your high school summer program that are now giving talks to the high school students. It's pretty amazing. And hosts visiting artists from all around the world and encourages and supports art science collaboration, specifically within the Center for Nanotech Sciences at UCLA. So welcome, Victoria.
Thank you, Andrea. It's really great to be here. I was here at Santa Fe almost 3 years ago for an exhibition at the Peters Gallery. It was fun, and I kind of fell in love with Santa Fe, so I'm glad to be back. And I wanted to mention that 2 weeks ago, I went to a conference on the Biodiversity Heritage Library. So if you don't know about it, you should, because I was actually the only artist, and it was librarians from all around the country and the world sharing their resources on biodiversity. And they said, anyway, I showed them my work. I was really nervous. Like, oh my God, what are they going to think? But I actually used their libraries, so they were super excited. And here I am promoting them a little bit. I just thought kind of nice connections. And I wanted to talk about connections yesterday, and Richard and I were having some wine, and they were saying how, you should talk about how all of this comes about. And it really is actually important, especially to students or younger artists. Sometimes you show this very elaborate work, and it's really intimidating. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a narrative. Slides are going to go real quick. A lot of work, most of my work, is online. So if you're interested in something deeper, you can go and find out. So I'm going to kind of zoom through 30 years, literally, maybe 40, to talk about how these things progress and how important it is to follow your heart and not listen to anybody. So at the bottom line is that this is, in the end, my thread of what I'm interested in and what I keep coming back to. People always ask me where you're from because you have a weird accent, and sometimes I play the game like, okay, guess, and we can go on and on. I have kind of international school accent because my father was from ex-Yugoslavia. He was a diplomat, so I was born in Washington, D.C., believe it or not. I went to primary school in Jakarta, Indonesia, and I'm convinced that I carry some bacteria from that place, now that I know more about microbiomes, and I get these strange things occasionally. I'm thinking, it must be Jakarta, because I was playing in the fields there. And I came back to Belgrade, Yugoslavia, not wearing socks and being tanned and being absolutely confused because they were teaching me a completely different version of World War II. And then I went to New York in the 70s, which was a cool, rough time there, where they taught me a third version of World War II. So I realized, oh, it's all stories, and I don't believe anybody. And then so I'm going to tell you light bulb moments, right? So first light bulb moment. By the way, I was studying fashion, so I still have a place for fashion in my heart, but I realize there's not much to do once you get to the basics. I somehow ended up in this club in Max's Kansas City when I was 14. and I saw the New York Dolls, and I was just like, oh, amazing. Like, that's like better than Mick Jagger. So it did something to my brain. And then I went to Mexico to visit my relatives there who emigrated before the war. And I heard the Dark Side of the Moon and smoked pot for the first time. And it was like, wow. So they sent me back home. They were like, no, we can't handle this. My father was obsessed with Nikola Tesla because at that time, actually nobody heard of him in the States, and everybody was teaching that Edison invented electricity. So he became obsessed about helping put together a monument at the Niagara Falls for him. And being the general counsel in New York, he had that opportunity. I was through osmosis learning stuff and meeting relatives of Nikola Tesla. I went to the hotel where he passed away. It was very tragic. I saw this picture and it kind of blew my mind, right? And as a kid, these things, I have children. I know the stuff that's imprinted from being around me has got to be working based on how they're living now. So he lit up the world. After all that, I ended up not going to study fashion, even though I was offered a full ride with Parsons. The reason being that I got very sick, and I was convinced I was going to die. And so I decided I'm going to be an artist because I'm going to die. So I went back to Belgrade and studied very, very classic painting. So I know anatomy, I know all of this stuff, like years of it. I was the only girl with 13 students. I was 17, so very early I got in. The next person next to me was 26. They all had beards. And I just came back from New York, so I was like, whoa, where am I? And so I kept doing my stuff to kind of run away from everything. But on the first day, my professor, Coca, walked in and she said, I just pulled up this book. It's in English. Can you translate the beginning, the intro? What I understood, it was, so you get admitted and then you have the summer and then you start. I understood that she wanted me to translate the whole kind of beginning, the whole translation of Helmut Wilhelm. So I labored the entire summer because I was also a little rough on the edges with Serbo-Croatian. It was good for me to relearn the language, but I just got so influenced by this book to this day. As you will see in the Hawk Zodiac, it kind of came back at me. But this was my classroom, and we came one step close of like actually dissection. Anatomy, I had to know all the bone names in Latin, draw every animal, all of that. And it was agonizing, and I was also isolated and feeling a little like out of it. So after 3 years, I said, I can't do this anymore. I'm back to New York, and I'm going to form a band. And that's me. And I think I was 20. So I formed a band, and I was doing clubs and records. We did a record at CBGB's. It was really fun. And I know that what I learned during this period is collaboration, media, computers started coming out, Channel C on cable came out. It was just a really exciting time in New York. And I got out of the I didn't want to have anything to do with art. I just hated it. But I had to go back and finish eventually. And that happened when a manager showed up and said, you got to be sexy and you got to repeat your songs. And I was like, I'm out of here. That's not for me. So just on the edge of something, I decided to leave. I discovered this book when I came back. That's Alice Bailey. I don't know if any of you are familiar. And that was pretty kind of mind-bending. I kept having this kind of attraction to Eastern philosophy much more than West. And I got a job at Rafiq's, which was a kind of film production place in the East Village. Do you know it? Anyways, so what happened is I ended up editing videos for video artists. So I was learning video, and I became a video artist because I was just doing it all the time. I also had and Metropolis became my movie of the, forever. I even cut the 16 millimeter films of it and edited a video and then cut it back together. I did the interviews for a Video Wave, a show that was on Channel C, and I was convinced, like some people later, that it was going to be freedom of information for everybody. And then I kind of landed through a friend of mine to intern from Andy Warhol, doing silk screening. And that's what I really wanted to have nothing to do with the art world because it was awful. I ended up doing a piece with going through the city with a gas mask and a white cat when Bhopal explosion happened. And I just really wanted to get away from that. But the art world kept kind of dogging me. I ended up at Venice Biennale just by some weird set of circumstance. There was a section called Aperto, which doesn't exist anymore. And Aperto means open, and it was international section for young artists, international young artists. Well, that was kind of stretched too, because I actually was young, but the person next to me was already established, and that would be Brian Eno. He was doing his light boxes. Now, I come from a very traditional art making, so I was like, oh my God, this is it. And then Roy Ascott was visiting Brian Eno because that's his student from art school. So I met him, and then I went to see his telematic work. I had no idea what was going on. I just knew it was so exciting and amazing. So I completely shifted my viewpoint, although I was showing, by the way, sculpture and painting, so I could have totally won the gallery round, but I kept resisting against many people telling me I'm making a huge mistake. Anyway, I got married to a nuclear physicist, Bogdan Maglic, who unfortunately recently passed away, and he took me to the Devil's Island for our honeymoon so that we could look at where Papillon escaped using the seventh wave theory. I don't know if you know the seventh wave theory, but it's basically he was watching waves and he noticed that on the seventh wave it takes off. And so he created this boat with coconuts, counted the waves, and then escaped. And actually, it's a true story. So that was our honeymoon. And then he told me about this amazing project about looking for hidden chambers in pyramids in Egypt. And that was my first collaboration because we actually worked on this together with scientists from Japan. Japan keeps coming back to me. And I was amazed at how they were talking about cosmic rays hitting the pyramids, and then they were looking where they would kind of stop. So that would be where the hidden chambers are. They weren't successful in finding any, but I was really struck by how they were matter-of-factly approaching the whole thing when there was so much more about these pyramids that was so incredible. So we did a documentary that got a major, major prize, which kind of threw me into being surrounded by a lot of scientists. Everyone was going to go to Cine Golden Eagle for best documentary. You could go and do the whole route, but it wasn't my route. However, I should mention that this just happened last year. So they actually found something years later, revealing using cosmic rays, and it was Japanese again. They just will not give up. So I was so thrilled. These guys are from, so they basically installed 40 muon detector plates inside the lower chamber of the pyramid, and they covered the whole surface, 10 square feet in the lower chamber, and we're kind of measuring these waves. So it's kind of like when you're talking about the algae, these are such amazing installations to me. I feel like, this is so much better than anything I see in the art world. It just needs to be framed by us. So anyway, cut to, I started really being around scientists, and the two people that left kind of a dent on me are Glenn Seaborg and Mary Gelman, who happens to be from around here. Of course, I did short interviews with them about their creative process, because I already started thinking, a lot of the scientists I meet are so cool and so eccentric. Why are they so separated from the artists? Like, what's going on? This is early, you have to realize, it's like in the 80s. So anyway, cut to, came to California, 1992, and I landed in John Wayne Airport. So I was pregnant with my second child, and everybody in New York said, that's the end of your career. Like, you're pregnant and you're going to California. And California's hip now in New York, but at that time, not at all. But I just, whatever, I follow my heart. And anyway, the moment I landed and I saw this statue that very much looks like Eastern European statues, I just thought, this is so cool, I'm gonna come back. So I gave birth and then I came back there. Now you have to realize this statue is in the center of this like kind of beautiful round space that's surrounded by palm trees and a gorgeous skylight and the light. And so when I was shooting the video, I noticed that the trees looked real, felt real, but they had no life. So I was like, what is going on? My attention shifted from John Wayne to these trees. The guard came up to me and I said, what kind of trees are these? And she said, oh, they're preserved. I was like, wow. So I did some research and I found Treescapes International that preserves trees. And I went there to check out what they do. And they have these special ways to replicate everything. So I came up with this idea of having interactive trees that are totally artificial. And by the way, every mall you go to, you don't know, I do. The trees, the big trees are mixed with the real plants. And the way they justify it is that architects can design the trees inside and not worry about outgrowing, and they don't worry about watering, they can just dust them. So they were actually arguing that it's environmentally good. I went to the Nixon Library. I was kind of exploring my area, and apparently in Nixon Library he won. Yeah, check it out. It's pretty cool. So this is the piece that came out of it. And these little girls are my kids, who are now 27 and 29. But there was 3 interactive trees. And, because I was doing this completely on my own. This is for the students. I was doing this completely on my own. I was alone. I had no institution. I had no money. I just had this crazy idea. I wanted to do interactive preserved trees. So I went to the company. I said, I'll do your video. And they're like, for what? Give me some trees and I'll do your video in exchange. So they said yes. Then I sent a proposal to SIGGRAPH. Simon Penny said, oh, this is cool. So then I went to Sony and I said, I'm in SIGGRAPH, can you give me monitors? And they're like, yeah, great, give us the credit. So I did it with no money, and it got me it kind of got me into the whole interactive scene, because Kit and Sherry were there and all these people that I had no idea about. Cut to, there's an earthquake, and this was pretty amazing. I mean, this can happen again any moment, actually. And may happen this year. But the earthquake really made me feel how, re-question again this whole idea of duality that was especially going on at that time. There's a virtual world and then there's a real world. So at that point, a little after that, I was invited to do an exhibition that was actually called Weird Science. And she said, oh, you're doing a lot of stuff online. Can you do an online piece? And I thought, no. So I did virtual concrete. And this was a concrete piece, like seriously concrete. It was 18 feet long, and you were walking on bodies. And we're talking about 95. So people were looking from the outside at others walking on bodies. It was the first experiment. And I thought it was interesting what was going on in the gallery, perhaps interesting to people online, but I needed something more to happen. So I thought, why not actually ask people, what kind of body do you want? Like virtual body. And I got like 1,000 people asking me. So I just thought, what? So this is new. This is when, the web just started, and it was all just amazing. And I just thought of it as a conceptual piece. But then I started getting emails from one particular guy. I saved those emails, saying, she's a fake. She's not giving us her body. She promised 3D bodies. And I was like, okay. So I'm going to make Bodies Incorporated. I'm a corporation. I'm going to take your body, take all your data. You're going to create the body out of 12 textures, and the textures are a combination of new age values with marketing corporate stuff. And once I have your body, that's it, right? So this was 1996. Unfortunately, it all came true. So there was 4 different sections in Bodies Inc. If you don't follow rules and regulations, you go into limbo, so your graphic body is reduced to text. If you want to get out of the text file, you have to answer all these questions and agree to everything. And then I was at UC Santa Barbara at that point. From time to time, people would say, could you please delete my body? I created a transvestite and my boss will see it. And from time to time, I felt bad. So I would go through the database, delete it, but save it for myself. And then there was one guy who was really serious. So he actually wrote to the university and said, I'm going to sue you if my body's not deleted. For a moment, I thought, what a great PR thing. Like, yes, sue me. But he's like, no. And UCSB said, we're taking your server down and forget it. So I created Necropolis, where you have to choose the method of death based on criminal databases. The way people kill each other is horrible. Create your grave, create your obituary. It's like the most painstaking process. And even after you delete your body, you have this nasty feeling that that data is still there. And guess what it is? Because I have a folder with all of it. Just like Facebook and all these other guys do now. I just had a feeling this was going to happen because people were just being too enthusiastic. Anyway, 20 years passed later. It's 20 years now, 21. I get like last 2-3 years, people are saying, can we show Bodies in? Like, what's up with it? Like, okay. And then I thought, what would I do now if I was doing Bodies Incorporated? Because that all came true. That's like, this is where we live. I would copyright the third eye. So Bodies Inc. Point 2 would be providing copyright to third eye because the psychic and the kind of spiritual abilities are the only our dreams, the only last thing we have. So we're working on body thing too. Anyway, so consciousness is important, and through having these projects and working with the scientists, in fact, having those interviews with Murray Gell-Mann-Seaborg and a few other scientists got me this really cool gig in 96, 97 with Stephen Hawking. We were producing a CD-ROM based on his paper called Life in the Universe. And this was, again, very beginning of internet. So the CD-ROM was, the idea that I had was that it would have 3 layers. It would have a layer of mathematical, a layer of cosmic, and a layer of biological realms. And you would kind of move through there. And your interface would be a phage. So the phage would go through these layers and grab information. But what stunned me with working so closely to Stephen Hawking was the realization of how our brains work and the wonder of that, because everything that you say to him, there would be like this a little bit of silence, basically the computer processing it. So the first thing you realize is, if it wasn't for the technology, you would never communicate with this person. So this is something amazing. On the other hand, if you, let's say I say, hello. Hello, right? Every sentence was like that. And it made it made me realize the speed of light that our thought works with, the kind of amazing ability of me putting my thoughts together, putting them in words, throwing them at you, you're processing it, throwing it back, and how we take it for granted. So I got tenure in UC Santa Barbara, and at the same time, maybe months, I was telling Richard this yesterday, couple months after I got tenure, Roy Ascott invited me to do a PhD in his program, and I was excited, like, yes, I'll do it. So in the faculty meeting, they're going, did we make a mistake? Like, what was this about? But you realize PhDs in arts did not exist. I was feeling very intimidated by postmodern humanists. I did not know what they were talking about. I felt really stupid. Then I really wanted to learn to understand what are they talking about, because I'm interested in philosophy. Turns out a lot of it is kind of later. I discovered a lot of it is like wordsmithing, making language really interesting, which is cool. I appreciate it for that. But if you're looking for meaning, a lot of times there's not much there. So, and I can say that. I got a PhD. Also, you want some respect from the scientists. It's good to have that if you're in academia. I love being in a research university. I actually feel like a kid in a candy store. My focus was Bucky Fuller. I was very lucky because the Buckminster Fuller library and his center was in Santa Barbara. And Allegra, his daughter, came to one of my talks, invited me, and I just stayed there. That became my focus of my PhD. And the reason I discovered Buckminster Fuller rings. So literally, I came to it this way, right? I actually came to it completely from culture. I was looking at Buckminster Fuller. I was looking at all he did. He died in '84. They discovered the Bucky balls in '85. So he didn't see it, but in a way, he predicted it. And very much became my entrance into thinking about how you could have your ideas about consciousness and relationship of mind to what you're creating, to experiences that you're creating. That's what his domes are really just prototypes. People were not understanding that. He was just testing what happens in physical space. And so this dome, for instance, was kind of the key. And through that, I landed into natural systems. So thinking about bees and sound, and sound never stopped, because having a band and being in music, I just was really never stopped being interested in sound. So bees and social networks, and really thinking about in relation to structures, even this one. This is actually cell phone structure, and it's not done for any philosophical reasons. It's because it's really just the most efficient system. But each one of these is owned by different companies. So going from kind of physical representation to thinking of mining, around 2000, the DNA was recoded, and I started thinking about how would you look at human bodies as kind of data. This paper by Dr. Donald Ingber just was kind of another guidepost for me to think about how these shapes and forms in nature just keep coming back in some forms. And I wanted to look at them in relation to human networks. And this is early images. I actually pulled up early images. I'm very interested in Chinese philosophy with the body, Qi and Ayurveda, and just looking at kind of a holistic way of interpretation. This is an image by Donna Cox in I would say 99. If you look at the networks now, it would just be like a solid band. So it's also interesting how intense that got, but also looking at how with data you can see where there is communication and where it's kind of blacked out. And so for a long time, tetrahedrons, hexagons, colors, intervals, sound waves, this kind of pretty much was my focus on looking and figuring out different ways to bring it in. Did a piece called No Time, which I have no time to tell you about, so that's the piece. But basically it's a piece about how much time you spend on a person's information basically gives them value. And all this kind of shifted pretty majorly at around 9/11. I coordinated together with my UC colleagues, the whole UC system, a series of different symposia, and this was my topic, 9/11. Networks, nanosystems. So I was really shifting my viewpoint to look at nanosystems and nano networks and beyond the visible realm, beyond the audible realm, like what's going on in these places that because our band is really so narrow. So the first kind of test was to create these interactive works where you're mimicking these environments. So this is graphene. And just to give like a quick sense of how crazy it is, this was literally a description from Jim Jimjewski, who's my partner and who was explaining it to me for a long time, and trying to explain it that, you know, I don't have to read it to you, but basically he was explaining how you're moving on the surface of the molecule and you're feeling the surface. And that pin, that finger is like a fine needle that's terminated by a single atom. So how can you even imagine this? Do you know what I mean? It's like beyond our realm, and yet it's so important because it's the basis of how everything is kind of goes bottom up, and everything is going up bottom up. But if you look at technology and how it was developed, it was top down, like a lot of our social systems, which you get to the limit, and then what? So this became very interesting to me. And this is Jim's concept for the buckyball abacus, which is the smallest abacus in the world. It actually made into the Guinness Book of World Records. And there's Jim, and that's the first piece we did together. He showed me models of buckyballs, and I was like, I can't, that looks so static. No, we got to redo it. So this is being actually manipulated with shadows. You can see videos of it online. Here at Peter's Gallery, I did a piece called Nano Mandala. It's projected on a bed of sand, and it goes from inside one one grain of sand to the entire mandala. So we worked with Tibetan monks who approved of it and actually loved when I would turn off the projector. There would be such laughter in the room, like, I love it. So seeing the mandala, more or less, but it disappearing, they loved. Cell sonics is another thing that he was researching on, and that led me to think in terms of sound beyond the audible realm, that to me is still very, very important, and in relation to water. So I did a series of pieces called water bowls, with bowls that are half empty or half full. And just thinking of water in relation to sound. So the 4 water bowls is, one was oil, another one was sound, another one was moon, and basically each one had a underwater microphone that responded to sound and light. Again, I don't have enough time to think about it, but to talk about it, but the point is that I realized how important water is. So I committed to it for life, to just keep helping others and working on it myself. So we started a site called Water Bodies, and we keep collecting works with water. That's not only artists, but also scientists, researchers, environmentalists, etc. And we're just to show the spectrum that a lot of people are trying to help. So instead of moaning about how bad it is, really to show how much good is being done daily. And then it brings me to the blue morpho, which I talked about briefly at the laser yesterday, and I have a blue morpho friend here. We're both obsessed with this gorgeous butterfly that happens to be endangered too, but is the ultimate nanotech. And here's some imagery that I'll just run through very quickly, repeating a bit. So we did some all different ways of looking at how these butterflies work. And this particular slide is important because it comes back to sound as well. The crystal actually has 8 hearts, for lack of a better word, and they pump at the same time constantly. And they're basically pumping into the metamorphosis. So here you have these spectral bursts of how these metamorphosis happens. And what really kind of blew me away about it is that it's really not gradual. So change doesn't slowly kind of happen. Change is constantly these bursts, these intense bursts. And I was very interested to think of it as kind of a collective metamorphosis we're going through, and was showing these kind of slides as well. And then doing the blue morph, the first place that I decided to set it up in was in the Integratron in Joshua Tree, where I worked quite a bit. I actually did quite a bit of work there. And then we had some friends help with a Tesla coil in addition to it. It's such a crazy site that I just thought it was perfect because that's where this big rock landed, and this scientist ended up living under it and getting information from the aliens of how to build it. And that was also the site of the largest space conventions in the country. Anyway, perfect place for the blue morph, which basically appeared like this. So people were sitting in the center on these interactive seats that had laser cut images of the blue morpho molecular scale structures. And what was very, very cool to me, and I loved, in fact, is the fact that people were performing. And I started really wanting to do that more, to create environments where the audience becomes the performer, and the piece changes depending on the place. So this was in Florence, this was in Norway, this was in Poland, New York, a little butterfly, I took a lot of pictures of people inside of it. Sometimes they would completely get lost, and we would have to take them out of the morph. This was another one in New York. So quickly, some collaborations to end with. Dr. Mark Cohen is a neuroscientist who I approached and asked, do you think there's a connection to extreme weather patterns to events like the Arab Spring or a lot of these really social, crazy events happening? And he actually didn't think it was such a crazy question. I wanted to brainstorm with brain scientists, basically. So this was the first brainstorming session that was with the kind of off-the-shelf devices and just brainstorming about the brainstorming project. Then I found out about aluminum foil, and I thought, oh, they use that in labs, so let's make our own. The scientists always made better aluminum hats than the artists. I went to his lab, and Bucky came to me again, because check this out. And this is his grad student who basically you sit in this chair, and each one of these nodes has a camera and is supposed to register your brain. So I said, how does it work? Can I test it? And he said, it doesn't really work. I said, can I have it? And he goes, no, it costs thousands of dollars. So, okay. So anyway, it was a little bit of an inspiration. But here's a geodesic sensor map that was on his door. And I was like, oh my God, Bucky's back. And looking at, discussing really, like, why is so much neuroscience looking at one part of the brain? Isn't it the whole thing and the body and other people? So that's different discussions. Here we're actually looking at the maps, and then we did a symposium bringing in a lot of artists and scientists who do, who are interested in neuroscience. This is Patricia Olenek doing the mirroring, and here she is visiting the lab. And then I went for a residency in Marseille and met Dr. Constance Hammond, who's an amazing neuroscientist, and she agreed to do a brainstorming at IMERA, and actually in her lab. Notice, in addition to the aluminum hats, that we had glasses of wine, like a proper French workshop, and we had a sociologist, artist, and she totally pulled out a whole brain, cut into half, and was explaining it to us, and I was like, oh my God. So anyway, how this project evolved further was by me getting a commission to do a piece that was here. It was at the Pacific Wheel, and I thought I had this idea that the wheel is the industrial mandala, and the octopus is the biological mandala that takes over the industrial wheel. And these are the guys that take over. So we had these tons of these octopuses, and people loved it so much that it was a little out of control. But I absolutely fell in love with these guys, and eventually started brainstorming with the octopus crowns because it makes sense. It's a logical thing to get yourself into the other consciousness, and these brainstorming sessions are actually nonverbal. So here's a 20-second clip. This is from the LA Art Fair. There's 8 colors, 8 a cappella sounds, and a full EEG set inside. And as they're connected or not connected, you can see where the color and the sounds shift depending on how their brain waves are connecting. And what's amazing about this particular moment is that it was so crowded and so loud, and they still somehow managed to get totally focused into each other's brain waves. We're further developing this. I have to say that Mark Cohen wasn't quite clear what's up with the octopus crowns. Meanwhile, I got more and more into it, so we'll see how it proceeds. Siddharth Ramakrishnan is a neuroscientist who I met while he was postdoc at UCLA about 10 years ago, maybe a little more. And he was studying neuroscience in relation to smell in particular, on the embryonic level. So the first thing that we did together was the dog sniffing game. Notice how it looks like a brain, right? So I was like madly taking pictures of everybody's dog noses, and we had a whole library of it, and thousands of smells that dogs can smell that humans can't, and the fact that they can smell 2 weeks in the past, and all this amazing stuff. So got me more and more into animals, or maybe animals wanted me to work more with them. I don't know, but they seem to be constantly at me and my mind. So my idea of how artists work is we're just servants to what needs to happen. So I don't own these ideas. I don't even know why I'm doing it. So this is Hawk Zodiac, which we're going to have a lunch with, a few of us. That's my daughter, who lives in China and speaks perfect Mandarin and is convinced that she's Chinese. So she's kind of pulled me into China more than I ever wanted to. And we started doing these experiments. This was in Hong Kong before any food came into it. But because of the setup, people wanted food because it reminded them of the table. And then this was in Taiwan, where we actually had like a whole thing, and they were saying, we gotta have food. So we started taking out crackers and stuff because they were just like, let's eat. And then we started experimenting with food. This was at UCLA, fully experimental. And then Linda Weintraub, who is, if you don't know of her, you should. She is the ultimate environmentalist, ecologist, theoretician, artist, writer, you name it, and she lives what she preaches. So she's on this amazing farm, homestead she calls, with a lot of her own animals, and she really liked this, so she brought me in with a bunch of artists, and we did a Hawk Zodiac private dinner, which was pretty amazing because people come with food that's recommended according to Chinese medicine and Ayurveda and the Western medicine based on their sign and the organ they're related to. And I send ingredients and they come with it and offer it. So they offer either themselves or the food that's good for them. And this man is a rabbit. He actually performed a magic trick with rabbits. And here's the bunch. This was in Vienna, that was very formal. And another one that was in a gallery, then it started evolving into tables. This is a man who's a horse, and he actually brought horse meat and cooked it right on the spot in Vienna, which really threw me into, okay, this is so cultural, because if I was in India offering beef, or if I was in Africa offering chickens, or in China being offered a dog, major stuff would be happening in my head about it. I happen to be vegetarian, but of the sort of saying, if you offer me something with love, I'll take it. That stopped when I was offered dog. I was like, I can't. I try my best, but I can't. So it's about hybridity, it's about genetic engineering, it's about thinking how we are animals, really, and how we are part of this system. And the crown came into this piece somehow. It just happened to be there. This is in Linz. Tried another one with the mob from the Ars Electronica. In Japan, everybody interpreted it completely differently, which became very interesting to me. So here's Japan. And then a really cool one in Tacoma happened with, that was in the Museum of Natural History, and the owner of the museum, the director I should say, actually brought out animals and all kinds of cool things. And then we did the last one at the Fowler. Last couple of collaborations I should mention is Charles Taylor and Takashi Kagami. Chuck Taylor is an evolutionary biologist, and Takashi is a physicist. And this has been going on for 5 years. It actually was NSF funded, looking at the acoustic sensor networks of birds. This is an ongoing research, actually, and NSF got very interested because the project kept evolving, and I kept learning about birds and how literate I was, because a lot of people I was meeting were actually, like, they would recognize hundreds of birds just by sound and tell you if it's a female or male and tell you all of this that we just lost, or at least I did. So I started thinking about how important it is to listen. And then we actually had a situation where we were invited to Times Square, and I thought, how is that possible? So we did it with earphones, and you have just to see a second, because something very weird happened. If you take these earphones and you're surrounded by, visual noise, and you don't hear anything, hearing birds, it does something really strange to your brain. So it was actually quite an interesting experiment. And then we did it at the Governor's Island. It's habitat specific, so wherever the installation is set, we asked scientists from that place to give us birds from, in this case it was New York, and birds that live in caves, because in Governor's Island we got literally a cave. In Japan, we contacted a scientist, Reiji Suzuki, who worked with Chuck, and he gave us the bird song. And then we started translating the directions when you're mimicking the birds to be Japanese. So it became about also being conscious of other human languages. What you see here is in this space is everything is tracked, so the sound is tracked, and I'll just give you a couple of seconds because I think I'm running out of time here. I'm running it a little bit. Here we go. So when you enter, it's worms in 3D space. I wanted people to experience worms in virtual reality because that's what birds are interested in. And this is the device that was made up. Here we have drones that enter into the scene, and the birds are self-organizing. And then this is how birds see us. Basically, not such a great picture. And then the space itself. So this is the Japanese team. It's actually a pretty large group putting this together. And the most recent version was at Ars Electronica, also in deep space, where we got German birds and actually Austrian, I should say, and people were either competing or collaborating. And now it's completely origami. So what it does is it gives you the bird song, you imitate it, then it measures the accuracy, and it tells you where you're at and spits it out as a kind of a mix. If you're really close, you actually can't tell. And if people work together, Reiji is very interested in deep learning, so he wanted to see do people learn better when they collaborate or compete, and they're continuing with that. And last is the collaboration that's current. I'm actually going to Vienna to continue work with Alfred. He was a chemist, and then he decided to get into filmmaking, and his lab is at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, where he actually does visualization, but has a scanning tunneling microscope in his lab, and works with visualizers, animators. So this piece is the most recent work that's actually shown here as a pop-up exhibition. And it kind of connects a little bit to the algae, definitely to noise and noise pollution. So all of these planktons are actually 3D scanned and then animated. This group in Vienna actually does the 3D scanning. And I was collecting sounds from different underwater noise that's either generated naturally or by oil drilling explosions, sonar explosions, etc., to see, how it would connect to the idea of how does noise pollution actually influence these micro creatures, the microbiome of the ocean, which is not actually being researched. So I'm hoping that by constantly asking this question and showing this, I inspire scientists to do some research that's not happening out there. And I think I've wasted enough of our time, so I told you this whole long story, and I'll stop here. Thank you very much. Any questions?
A couple of minutes for questions, but also Victoria will be back for a roundtable at the end of the afternoon, so your questions can be answered, but we can just do a couple of them.
Yes.
I remember more than 10 years ago in front of Wild Oats, there were these guys that were really concerned not about the microbe, which is of course important, but about how whales were being affected by our measured temperature fluctuations all across the entire Pacific Ocean. Do you remember that project, and where's that at right now? Are the whales being damaged?
The whales and the dolphins and practically all fish, but yes, majorly. It's really a huge problem with noise pollution and plastic pollution in particular. And there is actually a lot of research with this. Scripps is doing a lot of research. But here's the thing, they can tag a whale or a dolphin and follow them over time and measure and get some data. You can't do that with micro creatures, right? That are so diverse and there's so many and they travel in flocks. You can't do it. So really what's in my mind happening is there's a kind of a limit to reductionist methodologies that we're confronting, which is probably why artists are coming into the picture, because we're comprehensivists. So hopefully a new method emerges out of this kind of collaborations.
That was a really interesting statement about reductionist methods and things like that. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little more about how you see that as the artist's role in labs and that, what role that plays in your thinking.
I think, we ask really strange questions that come from angles that are not expected. So in science, you have a certain methodology you follow, and then I come in and I go, well, what about noise pollution? And I go, oh, what? So really cool scientists will go, well, let's look into this, right? Or let's look into metamorphosis of the butterfly. An example would be that one, for instance. When that was happening, it was purely out of curiosity, and also the scientist was just like, okay, fine, let's take a look, But what emerged is more and deeper research in sonic kind of vibrational field in cells. So it's actually, it's called sonic cell cytology. That was very much pushed by this kind of probing through an art project that was curious about sounds that are inaudible. So that's like a small example, and there's papers published, and it kind of went into a whole thread of things. It's very possible. I think there's more of it than is being acknowledged, actually.
Can I follow up for just a minute, because I've had that experience where scientists said to me, oh, you're coming here to kick me in the head again. I'm literally changed the course of my research on it. And I never say that in public because the scientists are like, right. And that's not my intention, is to change the course of anything. And I'm wondering how you deal with that, or if you just don't.
I do. I think that the scientists that either approach me or that I gravitate to are people I like anyway. So it's beside the science that I like them as humans. I could hang out with them or him or her in coffee shop and just be friends. And then that dialogue starts happening. It's long term. It's nothing that happens overnight. But I think there's a need. And there's a reason why more and more scientists are reaching out to artists. It's not just because, but it's because Marcone is another example. He was curious about the data. Like, what happens when two people in the public loud space are doing this? Most brain research is in an isolated room, one person. It's totally unnatural environment. So how can you trust that result, right? But to get a permission to do what I did would be impossible or really, really difficult. So there's definitely, a lot that science can benefit from. It's not a one-way street that a lot of times I get, like somehow artists are getting, no, it's a two-way street, and science really needs artists, like seriously, and not in a, and that's not an arrogant thing to say, but really to just kind of open up the possibilities. And artists need science too, because we're illiterate. We stopped learning math and science. All that was taken out of art education, which is also awful. The whole world is defined and led by scientific experimentation and technical and technological. So it's not enough to know to code. You have to understand, complexity and all the other natural systems, etc., to engage the contemporary world.
Okay, I think we should stop for now because we have a lunch break back here at 1:45 for a music performance by Patrick Maher, another keynote, J.D. Talisac, and the final concluding roundtable. So thanks, Victoria.
Thank you.